Nice.
All right, well, why don't we start? So have you all read Michael's paper?
Yes.
Yep.
Been a
And
while, but
Susan,
yeah.
where are we going to start?
Can I start with a comment, Michael?
Oh, please.
I was thinking that it's confusing to start off with the book of Job and the quote that what I feared the most has happened, because the beginning of Job, there's a dialogue between God and the devil, and the onset of problems that Job has is because God allows the devil to do those things, because God said that Job would be able to withstand anything the devil could throw at him. So I was thinking that maybe you could quote that saying, what I fear most has happened, without attributing it to Job, because of the origin of it. Job's troubles appears to have come from a, a dialogue between God and the devil.
Well, so my thought in that regard would be when you read that text, it actually doesn't mention the devil. It mentions Satan. And in the Aramaic language, Satan means the resistor, one who misleads. It's a product of something going on within the human mind. When you tie that together with the Creator says, tell me what you want, ask and you will receive. You hear the Creator saying, of the works of my hands command ye me. Tell me what to do, God says. So if Satan, if that's accurate in Aramaic, that Satan is the past in the mind of man, and it is what misleads us, and we are functioning out of that pathological state, i.e., fear and dread, I would offer our pathology, then for me, that makes Job's insight just so gigantic. Oh, it's my own mental disorder. It's my own pathology that's created this result. And what I need to do is resolve my pathology.
I think the problem is that many people who read your paper won't have that same reaction to God and Satan. They will think of it as the objective reality of God and Satan, and the onset of problems with Job is as a result of that dialogue.
Yeah.
And it's just confusing right at the outset to have that to be a quote to Job. I was thinking if you could somehow skip over Job.
Or explain what you just
Well,
said.
yeah, the question, I really appreciate the question, Tim, because that assists me to see a different perspective than the one I have, and I will clarify that because I think it really is a theological point that is missing in our culture. And when it comes in, yes, there's going to be confusion when one starts to see, oh, my pathology is directing God.
Mm-hmm.
God said, of the works of my hands, command ye me. And if Job has, as he came to this insight, that which I feared most, I set this up. And I gave a command to the Creator who said, command ye me, tell me what you want. And what is Job's fear? The whole book starts out with a story about what his fear is. He's this good and upright person, but then he's got this fear that his children are not as good and upright as he, and that they're going to blow it. And it makes the point that this is a regular thing for him to do, like it's a daily occurrence for him to lament about the possibility that his children aren't going to be as good and upright as he is.
But isn't that an awful lot to take on at the beginning?
Beginning of what?
Well,
Beginning of the paper.
Of the paper.
if we're going to end war, yeah, we're going to have to take on a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, my take is when I apply that idea of pathology to Job's thinking, is that war is a pathology. And it's been accepted for so many thousands of years by so many millions of people. And I'll tell you, there's going to be a whole lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth and a whole lot of confusion when people start to actually step into the place of going, my belief in war, my thinking that this is what's going to protect me and save me from those evil ones out there, the ones that I blame for what's going on inside of me. There's going to be a lot of processing to be done if people are
Right.
going to get to the truth. I mean, it's been going on for the planet for so long and been so accepted and honored and revered. And I certainly honor those who've gone and served for what they've given. I mean, it's outrageous what they've had to do. And the
Yeah.
truth is, they're working for a pathology.
Yeah, that reminds me of a quote in one of Lillian DeWaters' books. She says, if no one on earth believed in evil, do you think it would exist? And then she gives a little story about how it could have first started. And it was like a trick to scare someone. And then that person was like, oh my God, there's something evil there, you know, and then it spread and they all witnessed it, but it was all just like a deception. It wasn't even real, but everyone began to believe like in evil. Like you could see how that could start something, and then it just mushrooms out and everyone starts believing in something that's not even real.
Mhm. You know, Michael, it is a lot to start with, but on the other hand, if you're what you just said, that is the central point and crux of the problem. And then you go on and explain the solution, which is the use of the tools in however we do it. Yeah, I think you've got to put that, because that's a great example. The Job thing. Oh,
Well, it's a powerful and detailed insight into how his tragedies occur. And it's interesting. I was actually, after I read your edit of my paper, I went back and reread some of the recovery phase of Job, and it's interesting because he has this interaction with all of his friends, and and he's questioning God, and his friends are questioning God and questioning what was Job's sin, on and on it goes. And the resolution comes when he decides to activate, Tim, your sister's name. Theologically, Rachma was not, at least as far as I know, was not put forward as a major solution in the world until Yeshua came up with it. And they asked him that question, what's most important in the law? And he says, when you think of a creator, when you think of neighbor, you must maintain this condition called Rachma in your mind. And if that condition is in your mind, then the gateway for your human life, love, is open, and it will be present in your physiology. So if you think of neighbor in an Aramaic, neighbor means anybody that you think about. So if you think of Hitler or Stalin or whoever we could put on that list today, if you can maintain Rachma, then you are part of the solution. If you can't maintain Rachma, then you're part of the problem.
yeah.
If you go into some form of hostility or fear. So the resolution that he comes up with, and again, thank you for the edit of the paper, Susan, because it opened some other questions for me. You go back and you read his resolution. He goes through all of this with his friends, and then he decides, and this is the moment at which the shift occurs, that he's going to pray for his friends. Now, that doesn't make any sense in this culture. Like, why would that resolve his problems? Because we believe that prayer is putting your order into the cosmic gift catalog, or at least that's what we've been taught by and large. But if you go to the Aramaic definition of the word prayer, prayer means literally in Aramaic to set a trap for God. John talks about a lot about presence. when I hear John say that, what I hear John saying is he is in prayer. He is becoming the space where the active presence of love shows up in his physiology and in his life. That's prayer in Aramaic. Prayer's petition is, God, here's my list for today. This is what you should be doing. That's not prayer, that's petition. So what really stood out to me when I reread that this morning, what was the whole resolution became his connecting with active present love, his reconnection with God by holding the space for his friends. Like, he had a few little questions for his friends. He was questioning their sanity and, their intelligence as he went through that whole process, as they accuse him, etc. But when he returns to that condition of Rahma and love literally enters his physiology, his pathology heals, and his whole life turns around. To me, that's the point of Job. And to me, that's the crux of what every person on the planet who believes war is rah, rah, yay, it's what protects me. That's what every person who believes that's going to have to experience if they're ever going to get a change of mind. And there's going to be a whole lot of healing crisis to go through in doing it. And remember the symptoms of healing. On a physical level, healing looks like any kind of physical symptom you've ever had in low energy. On a mental level, looks like any kind of negative thought you've ever had in confusion. And on an emotional level, looks like any kind of negative feeling you've ever had in depression. That's what people are going to go through if they are going to heal the support the energetic dynamic of war in them. And if we ever want to rid the earth of that scourge, that's what's going to have to happen. That would be my offering. And Job, to me, opens the door, both in the lesson he gives of, I've given direction, the resistant part of me. I'm resisting what my children might be doing. I am now in Satan, and Satan in me, the resistor that has misled me about my children, is now giving God instructions, commanding God to produce a result. And now that that result has been produced, I have work to do. I've got to clean up my own mind. Hey, Carrie, welcome, young lady.
Yay.
Hi, Carrie.
Hi, Carrie. Ellen,
Did
were
you
you
get
going
my
to say
message?
something? Oh, okay. Yeah. All right.
I just want to say something. I'm going to have to leave at the peak of the hour, and I'm sorry, but Michael, I wanted to thank you deeply for your work, and I want to look deeper into the relationship between the Hebrew word ahava and racham or rachma, or because in the Torah, the primary instruction is Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, and then it goes on Ve'ahavta, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul. So when it shows up in the Younger Testament, it's an echo from Torah. And so it's been a question for me, and I know Dr. Neil Douglas Klotz has a chapter in his book on the relationship between Ahava and Rachma. So I'll look more into that. But
Cool.
what you gave to me was I've been practicing a lot of Sufism since this
Right.
whole difficulty with seeing what Israel as a nation has become. And there's a huge amount about Bismillah, first in alignment with Allah, which is like Allah in Aramaic, Erachman, Erachim. The two primary qualities of Allah in Islam are Rahman and Rahim. And I'm going, well, then I need to open more to this love and compassion from the Creator. And so that's what my practice has been. And then noticing this resistance, how can I be in resistance to understanding God as love? And yet that resistance shows up as digestive issues and et cetera, et cetera. So I'm really fascinated by this idea of pathology, and we'll continue doing the work and tracking your work as best I can. And it's so much fun for me to connect with Tim and Sue through this work. It's just been one of the gifts of this elder chapter. And the last piece I want to share is that I'm dealing with envisioning the ideal death scenario for me. Because my kids are like, you want what? I mean, they just don't even want to think about it. It's all so weird. But my sense is that it's really important for me that when I'm getting ready to leave the body, that I have people around me that are saying, go for it, girl.
Hold the space, right? Yeah.
This is your wedding day. And so when I was translating what you were saying about pathology into my body, I'm going, it's this belief that death is bad or that death is an end that is at cause. And if I can really let go of that mistake and accept the eternal nature of the divine, then hopefully my body can relax and allow this passage, which is natural for all of us, to be one of great blessing. So,
Well, I'll join in holding that blessing. And, one of the things that I've observed with working with the Aramaic is that virtually every key word, every important word in Aramaic has been turned exactly backward in our Greek-based culture. And one of the key words that I hear you talking about is this word love, and the belief that love is something that God does to us, or that we do to each other, or that we give to each other, or we get from each other. And that's not an accurate representation of the Aramaic word love. The Aramaic word love represents a state of being. It's not that God loves us. God is the space of love. When we're instructed to have Rahma, what's being said is there's a gateway in the frontal lobes of your brain that brings active present love into your physiology. And now you are the presence of love with your neighbor, with the creator. It's not about loving it. It's got nothing to do with the neighbor and the creator, except when they're objects of attention, if you're going to have a human life, you've got to maintain your human life. And it's Rahman that empowers you to maintain your human life. So it's not about loving your neighbor, nothing to do with loving your neighbor. And I mean, there's so many key words. If you would, maybe you can send through Susan your email address or phone. And there's a workshop that myself and Dale Allen Hoffman did called Aramaicisms. And Aramaicisms is a term that I coined that represents our effort to bring the original Aramaic meanings of the words back, because you can't understand what anybody says if you don't know the meanings of their words. And so I'll send you a link to that 4-hour workshop. So if you would give them email, phone number, what have you, then I'll make sure you get that. And of course, we've got our radio show 5 days a week. So come and play. Come and join us for the radio show.
thank you, Michael.
All right. Honored. Delighted.
Shalama Amchlan.
So, Rahman, what is the other word for love you were referencing?
Is your extension cord in your car?
Ahava.
Extension cord in
Ahava. Or in Aramaic, chuba. Like Allah chubao. God is love. I'm sure Michael works with that.
Let me throw a couple of thoughts in there. So the frontal lobes of the brain is where our intentions are stored. The back of the brain is where perception is stored. I'll send you a link. We've got a whole page. We've talked about this a lot on our radio show. So there are two filters, gateways, and they're correlating interactive filters. One is Rahma, the other is Chuba. One is over perception, intentions, frontal lobes of the brain. One is over perception, the back of the brain. Together they were called perfect love, and what they said, remember, was perfect love casts out fear. Your mind cannot generate a fear-based reality, cannot generate pathology in the presence of Rahma and Kuba. And they're interrelated filters. If one is lost, then the other is lost. But the primary, according to Yeshua, what's the first order of business if you're going to maintain your human life? Have Rahma. When you think of any neighbor, it doesn't matter if it's the worst, the person you consider to be the lowest on the earth. If you go into hostility or fear, you just lost your human life. You just blew the whole thing. You can forget about the rest of the conversation if you don't have a human life. So he's like, here's what comes first. And then Kuba is how you keep your perceptual mind on track with love so that threat and irritation are not possible products. Pathology is not possible from a human mind where Rahman and Kuba are active. And, that's what they called saints. And it wasn't mystical. It was like, this is a doable thing. It's a practice, but you got to get the words right.
So Rahma and Kuba.
They're interrelated filters. One is over the frontal lobes, one's over the back of the brain. And if one goes out, the other tends to go out. Maintaining the two of them, again, was called perfect love. It keeps the mind on track where every construct that the mind generates is based in love rather than in threat, irritation, negativity, or destructiveness. It keeps the mind on track. It's how you keep your instrument in alignment with the truth of who we are created to be.
And this is an intention, and it doesn't have to be a feeling.
It's a practice. To me, it's a practice, and there's a third term that comes in from the Aramaic, which was ruka de kudsha, and they're words that represent what the Greeks called the Holy Spirit, but there's nothing in the Aramaic about a disembodied spirit being. If you go back to the creation story, what you hear is that not that the Creator sent out His Spirit, but that the Creator sent out its breath. And it literally is our breath. And you watch people when they're in trauma, you watch people when they're in hostility or fear, what do? They hold their breath. That's the denial of the Holy Spirit. And when that breath can't move through us, then trauma energies that are off the mark, get locked in tissue. Now you've got physical pathology because that tissue has been assaulted by something based in hostility or fear. And holding the breath, watch people when they're in pain, when they're in trauma, when they're afraid. What do? Shut it down. The restoration of the breath, literally defined in Aramaic, it's gendered feminine, she who undoes the effects of our errors and teaches us the truth. You've got to allow that breath to reach in the cell that is in pathology in order for her to undo the pathology. And most people hold their breath in the presence of their own pathology, their own hostility or fear, and it's got to be restored. And so we live in a world that tends to be based in what people call give and take, but it's actually not a give and take world. In truth, it's a give and receive world. And when we start to open to receive the breath and through the whole physiology, then literally it's like the visual I use is water came down this rocky place that became the Grand Canyon, and it dissolved everything that got in its way. Ruka de Kudsha, when she moves through your structure, dissolves everything that never belonged in your structure. When the Greeks threatened us with the denial of the Holy Spirit is the unforgivable sin, they had it backward. It's close, but like everything else, they turned it backward. The denial of the breath means that the very thing that can dissolve whatever your pathology is withheld from your pathology, and now you're stuck with your pathology. So it isn't the unforgivable sin, it's that when you cut yourself off from the breath, you leave yourself stuck in unforgiveness because you don't allow the power that can process those energies out of the structure to dissolve them. So you're stuck in unforgiveness. It's not unforgivable, it's stuck in unforgiveness without the breath.
Rakamana, do you have the concept of ruka de kucha? Are you there, Rakamana?
She said she was going to have to go at the top of the hour, so it's.
Yeah.
She's looks like she's still there.
Yeah, her camera's on, but her
She may have had to
link
go
is still
out
there.
Yeah.
Never mind.
So,
But we can continue the conversation next time she's available. So, or do it on the radio show, whatever.
John, do you want to say anything about this? One question I have on your behalf and my own is that you know, if you've got a kink in your hip or you've got something going on, does that mean we're doing something wrong? We're not breathing properly, or we're... Anyway, I was imagining you might be asking that question, John, and maybe you're not.
Let me get my thoughts together here. Um, well, I discovered the presence. I was a teenager full of anger and fear. And when I had my second out-of-body experience that I believed, I realized that changed my whole life, because I realized that I really don't die. And when I had my third body experience, when I went right through the walls when it was over the San Francisco Bay Bridge, I realized that I was a spirit and that I don't die. And that changed my whole psychology.
Yeah, that would change everything, wouldn't it?
Because I lost my fear of death, but not my respect for... I didn't lose my fear of getting hurt. I didn't want to become a masochist, because, you know, now I knew that that transition was really just a smooth process where I didn't even know that I had a body when I left the body until I saw the body. So there was no feeling, no crazy whatevers, smooth as silk. You're out of the body and you're conscious, whereas the body is not conscious. The spirit that leaves the body is conscious. And you look at the body and you go, what's going on here? Because you can still think, so you don't lose your mind. So that led me to the conclusion, the mind is not bad. It's coming with me. I remember things, but I had no fear. I had no anxiety. I was a poor kid. I had no resources whatsoever. So here I am in this college, and I've had these out-of-body experiences, and I'm looking at the world, I'm looking at the Bible from different lenses. But it changed my mind radically. And I knew that I would never be really hurt, or it actually changed my way I played basketball. I was more daring. I mean, it literally changed my life. I lived in a neighborhood when I was a kid that if you didn't fight, you didn't survive. So I was a fighter, a clean fighter or a dirty fighter. I just did anything to not let anybody beat me up or hurt me. And that attitude was, don't let anybody put anything over on me. And I'll go to war with them. I'll fight. I'll kill them. I'll shoot them. I'll get a gun. I'll do anything. I'll protect myself and my family. I'm not going to die. And I don't need a gun. I don't need a knife. And whenever I got into negative situations, people just let me go. I couldn't figure that one out. They just let me go.
If you're in the present, you can't be touched.
You can't be touched.
Wow.
That's the protection. And that's what my offering with this article is. That's what each person on the planet, or at least a critical mass of them, need to reach in order for us to put an end to this insanity, this pathology called war.
And I think
Me,
it
that's what
begins
it's all
with
about.
children. I think it begins with children, talking about once you lose the fear.
But I want to make sure we discuss the issue of war and the use of the tools as a way to finding our way to peace on earth for everyone. Critical mass. Anyway, Michael, do you want to say anything to what John was saying?
No, I'm with him that my offering, the one thing I would offer in what you said, John, is that the true mind is that which you were experiencing when you were not connected to your body. What people call the mind is what in this work I refer to as carbon-based memory. And it is a process that generates perceptual constructs from the past. And people who are stuck in the past are what Yeshua called the dead buried by the dead and the blind led by the blind. So literally in this work, I often kind of tongue in cheek, but I mean it quite literally. You got to be out of your mind. You got to be out of this carbon-based memory to be in the mind you're talking about. And it's that mind that is the resolution to everything. And that's exactly what Job did when he stepped into not praying, not putting his order into the cosmic gift catalog, but literally becoming the space of active love at the impetus of his friends. And that presence of active love moved through him, cleaned out his pathology, and he was restored. To me, that's the lesson of Job, and it's exactly what I'm hearing you referring to, that your own direct experience of it, and that, you know, being looking down at the body and not being like knowing that's not it. That's a pretty shocking thing the first time it happens. It's like, whoa.
But John did retain what he's calling his mind, and his identity was intact while he was outside his body. So go ahead, Michael.
Well, I would put in the listening to what John had to say, I would put the word mind applying to the state of being that we are, our ability to originate, our ability to think, our ability to function as conscious, active, present love. That is the mind. And yes, whether in or out of the body, Paul says, I knew not, I saw things I could not utter. His mind was obviously there and active, but I would distinguish that from carbon-based memory and perception. Yes. Am I a being? Do I have individuality? Do I have an identity? Yes. And that mind, that what the world calls mind, carbon-based memory and perception, also has an identity. And Yeshua said that identity has to be killed in order for you, being, to live with the true mind that the Creator gave you. You, non-being, the false self, the self, and John, I heard you, what I listened to was you described the death of your false self. I don't need a gun anymore. I would have gotten a gun. I'd have done anything. I'd have killed anybody. That's carbon-based memory. That's the false self. And in what I hear you describing, you're awakening, you're parting from your own body and its mind. You gave up everything of that mind and said, I don't need guns. I got the boss protecting me. I don't need that stuff. And that's the healing of war. That's the essence, to me, of the healing of war. And for most people, it doesn't come quite the way it came for John. You know, I don't know how many lifetimes John's been working at this to arrive at this. But for most people, they need a mechanism. They need a way to understand, a way to recognize that carbon-based memory is not where the answers are, a way to set it aside and then step into the true mind, which is the replacement, which was called the mind of Christ. So you look in the scriptures and there are two minds there. There's the mind of man, which is always the problem, and then there's the mind of Christ. There's carbon-based memory and there's a mind of love. Rachma is the gateway that brings that mind of love, that mind of Christ, into physiology. And when we're willing to give access to breath, to any pathology we have within us, then the pathology dissolves. And then we become part of dissolving the pathology of the world. You know, the principle that's expressed in the Course in Miracles. When you are healed, you are never healed alone. Each one who enters into
Yeah.
that realm brings an energy that opens the space for everyone who has that particular pathology to also heal.
Wow.
So,
One thing that
Michael,
Go for
Go
it.
ahead, Carrie.
I just had one question about the mind of man and carbon-based memory.
Yes.
And you mentioned Course in Miracles. Would you equate that the same as ego mind?
Yes. EGO, edging
Okay.
God out, edging love out throughout the
Okay.
mind of Christ. And now we have this self, lowercase self, that is totally and completely false. And that is the self that needs to be forgiven. Only once again, we've got a bastardized word from the Greeks for that word forgiveness. It isn't that that self needs to be let off the hook for anything. Literally, that is the lowercase self is the self that needs to be removed, killed, eliminated, eradicated. All of its beliefs in war, fight, guns. Let me protect myself with guns. That self has to go. Ego has to be removed. Then carbon-based memory becomes what it was designed to be. It's a database. When you need information from it, like your computer, you go to it and you get information from it, but it doesn't run you anymore. But if you have lived in if most everybody in this culture, my take is by the age of about 4, we are all have all been trained to be card-carrying members of the one world universal religion of blame, guilt, shame, and fault, suffering. Well, we've all been convinced of that. That mind has to go. What I heard John describing is, in his early years, he lived in it and he'd take any weapon he could to survive. And then he gave it up. There's a mechanism that Yeshua presented for giving it up, and it's called forgiveness. And it isn't about letting that self off the hook. It's literally about dissolving the energetic dynamics of the ego or the false self and removing them from control. It's just data in a database. There's no self there. And of course, you know, that one of the what I consider to be one of the most important and most misunderstood lessons in the Course in Miracles is the lesson that is entitled, What is the World? The world is false perception. Simple, one sentence, first sentence in that lesson. The world is false perception. When we're living in that fear-based, that pathological fear and hostility-based self, as Job did, we think things into existence, and the Creator goes, well, I did say of the works of my hands command ye me. I wasn't thinking he'd tell me to do this, but okay, if that's what you want, I'll do it. Can we forgive those generational dynamics now? Can we remove those? And that's where the technology of Yeshua's first century Aramaic forgiveness comes in, would be my take.
John, did you feel in the out-of-body experience that your ego self had died?
Well, I didn't think of it in those terms, but I want to say this. In my interaction with many people in spiritual schools and outside of them, I met numerous people who, some of them just ordinary people who didn't practice any spiritual system, who were very caring and loving. And I met people who practiced various different spiritual systems and were caring and loving and came to the same conclusions that Michael is talking about. And so I developed a respect because I realized I didn't really know the all and the everything about all of these things. And that I think each person has an individual path embedded in the collective path.
My take there, John, would be that would be the activity of Rahma. When Rahma is open, then the activity of the compassion, the generosity, the creative process of our human lives, what we were given, is now available to us when we stop functioning out of that little, lowercase w mind, and start functioning out of the real mind, the mind of being that is not dependent on body. When people talk about a near-death experience, I usually relabel that to that's a near-life experience. Most people have lost their human lives to the generational patterns in carbon-based memory and the ego self, or what I refer to as the non-being self. And when we lose our lives to that, when that is finally defeated, then awakening happens, and we're back in an aspect of our lives that's never been touched by any tragedy or anything that happened in our world or in our lives, but rather we're restored to the truth of who we are. And that life is carried into our tissue structure on the breath.
Yeah, I followed the fourth way system by Gurdjieff, and he said, and I remember this pretty clearly because it related to my experience. People asked him, like, what's the purpose of the fourth way? And he said, to create a higher being body. And he said there were different bodies, all divine, but he said there was like a certain level of the body, and then the ultimate is the divine body. And so as I pursued that question, that koan, it was revealed to me that the body has a purpose, and that this purpose is to create a spiritual body, and the spiritual body, called the mind, creates another body called the spirit, and that they're contiguous. It's almost like a seed creates a little plant then creates a bigger tree.
I'm
And
with you there, John.
that the body has a purpose, and we misuse it, or identify with it and think this is the end game, whereas this is like a seed.
In our workshop, Purpose, Personal Power, and Commitment, we point out that everyone on the planet has exactly the same primary purpose. We all have different secondary purposes, but the primary purpose of every human being we offer in that workshop is to develop a viable, conscious, spiritual body. That's what the purpose of life is. That's primary. Once you got that, then you get about your secondary purpose. What are your skills? What do you enjoy doing? And now, how are you going to deliver that presence of active love into the world through your body?
Right, and one of the things that I experienced was I experimented with attention and studied attention. And attention, nobody knew what attention really was until 1985, when the German neuroscientist Wolfgang Singer at the Leibniz Institute discovered that attention was a psychoaccelerant that creates synchrony. And so that explained the presence, because when you are attentive to yourself, your body starts to go into synchrony, and you start to vibrate as a whole unit. And that's what creates the presence and what creates the OB and the near-death experience. Because when you die, you're not thinking about your bank account. You're focused on that moment. You're designed to be focused in that moment. And that focus triggers the spirit in you that's already in you. And it comes out as a spirit. So it was all connected with attention. And I remember in Aramaic, there was a special word for that, but I can't remember what it was.
Well,
Okay.
my take would be that when clinical death occurs, it shuts carbon-based memory down, and now you have a near life experience. The people who are fortunate enough to be resuscitated after their clinical death come back with stories like what you experienced. And it really isn't a near death experience. So from our misperception, we call it that. It's a near life experience. It's where you get to taste, free of the generational patterns of carbon-based memory and the unresolved issues of a million people in your bloodline. Free of that whole system is shut down, and you get to be out of your mind, and you get to experience your human life. And then if you're resuscitated, you bring that back, and there's an interesting movie out there based on the true life story of a man named Daniel Brinkley. Powerful films called Saved by the Light. And he's a pretty nasty killer. That's his livelihood. But he's hit by lightning, has a near life experience, totally turns his life around. And it shows some of the struggle that he has to go through in dealing with his own carbon-based memory. That's a powerful film. Saved by the Light, Daniel Brinkley. It's a book too, of course, but the movie's really well done, and it shows how a couple of the scenes where he goes back. He as a result of being struck by lightning, he's pretty fragile, and he ends up with a couple of these experiences, and each time he has to go back and deal with the kills that he's done, the people he's murdered, and he has to process through those things in his coming back to his body and being able to be awake in his being rather than stuck in the traumas that he's inflicted on other people. It's a really powerful portrayal of the whole story from.
Is it on YouTube?
I don't know whether it's on YouTube or not.
I have a question about that also goes back to carbon-based memory. And when I was studying at the School of Metaphysics, we had a lesson called the conscious ego, where we basically were taught that the ego is critical for having this experience here on Earth, and that what we should aim to do is not to kill the ego, but that the ego is subservient. And that has always kind of struck with me, that we need to make the ego subservient to the Christ mind.
I think I'd agree with you fully with that, Carrie. And when Yeshua says, in order for you to live, you've got to die, my offering would be it's the control of that. It's that thinking, that perception, what that non-being self presents to you is life, that has to be set aside. And it becomes, the words I used earlier, it is now your footstool. It was originally designed to be the footstool of the being. It's your database. You need some information from the past? Oh, here, I got some information. Rather than, oh, here's a past experience. I'm going to put this in front of what's actually happening in the world, and I'm going to believe this. That has to go. And yes, subservient, it becomes the footstool rather than the master. There's another metaphor that Yeshua uses, and he talks about, the master is bound by the servants in his own household. This is the temple, and most people are bound by the hostilities and fears that are unresolved, their own pathology from the past, and it runs their whole lives, as well as creates their diseases, and ultimately kills them. Because I'm going to offer, we're not designed to die. Energy, my background's in physics, energy is eternal. It's the only thing that exists. If energy is the only thing that exists and energy is eternal, we must be eternal. Why do we expect to die? Because we sin. What is sin? Is it some terrible Greek thing that we've done that, God's displeased? No, that's all crap. The word sin in Aramaic is simply an archery term. If you were on the archery range and fired at the target and you missed the bullseye, the scorekeeper yelled sin. You're off the mark. If you put enough off the mark energy in your tissue structure, sin, you're going to die. Yeah. And of course, we've inherited death for how many generations? How many generations in our bloodline have died? How much do we need to face in ourselves to clean up everything in our genes that has ever killed anybody in our generations? Are you willing to take on that level of work? To me, that's what we're here for, to take on that level of work to clean that up and then step into what we're truly designed for. And we're not designed to die. Now you go back and you listen to Yeshua in the book of Revelations, and he just lays that all out. He says, to he that overcomes. What are you overcoming? The control game of this ego self or non-being self, carbon-based memory. To he that overcomes. He will not taste of the second death. What's the second death? First death is when we fall out of awareness of ourselves as created love into the carbon-based memory story of hostility and fear, and I need guns and I'll kill anybody to protect me. That's the first death. The second death is when that kills us physically. He says, will not taste of the second death. He will become a pillar in the temple. The temple is the body, mind, the temple of my God, and shall go out no more. Pretty clear statement that we're not designed to die. It's a lie. It's a fraud. But everybody's bought it. Everybody's doing it. So why would anyone choose to be any different? You're each invited to our New Year's Eve party, December 31st, the year 4949 at Heartland. Be there or be square. 4949, December 31st. Please put it on your calendar. We're not designed to die. That's just energy can't die. It can't. You can change its form. How do you change the form of any energy system? You put in energy in that doesn't belong in the system, something unlike it. And if it's an incoherent energy, then it comes apart. And it doesn't matter whether it's a radio signal. Put an incoherent energy into the beautiful Rachmaninoff music that you're listening to on your $100,000 stereo, and the music goes to trash. It's dead. It's gone. Because there's an incoherent energy put in the energy system. Put an incoherent frequency, hate, fear, rage, guilt, drama, trauma, sadness, grief, vengeance into your energy system, and you now have an incoherent energy that wherever you store it in tissue, it will become your disease. When you face your disease and you're able to forgive it, your disease, and I don't care what it is, will disappear.
So that's,
That
following that thought, the presence, when I ask the presence, how does paying attention, because when I asked it, how do I get rid of it? Because I had a lot of guilt, fear, anxiety, and hatred. And so when the presence, I asked the presence, how do I clean that up? It said, just watch it. Attention is the cleanser. And then knowing what attention was, that attention was a synchronous energy, I knew that it could entrain the ego into a positive state. And that's what creates the joy that I feel periodically. So by just watching, the presence says, you don't have to do anything. He said, don't go in there thinking that you're going to do something. Just watch it.
Well, Yeshua had a set of tools that I think takes that conversation to another level, would be my offering. And there is something we can do, and it's called forgiveness. And it's a technology that's 2,000 years old and was disappeared from the planet almost as soon as it arrived. And, for me, what my work is about is restoring that technology. And you'll notice that you're never in a disease state. Let's go back to our conversation about war. Whether it's, your own personal little war with the person in the bed next to you every night, or the child that's, downstairs in the lower bedroom, or the parent that's off in some other city somewhere, or the latest dictator. Doesn't matter who it is. If you're in a state of dis-ease, notice that disease never takes you over unless that someone violates a goal you have for them. Notice that serenity and peace are yours. I mean, unless you're just a generally miserable person, unless somebody violates a goal that you have for them. And Yeshua, brilliant insight and tool, says that is what drives the carbon-based memory system to produce its pain and create the diseases in your tissue structure. In Aramaic, the word forgive is shebag or shabak. It's been translated as forgiveness, but it actually means to cancel. Goals are the key way into accessing what's driving diseases and pain. When I am in the experience of a painful perceptual construct that is also perhaps reflecting in my physiology, if I look at the goal that I'm holding for whoever I'm currently blaming, I might be blaming my body, I might be blaming, whoever, and I cancel that goal, what happens is carbon-based memories, it's like a mini near-life experience. Carbon-based memories, perceptual constructs based in the past, collapse when you do that. That gives you at least an instant of a taste of a near-life experience. Of course, the mind's real fast to come back online. You might have to cancel that goal 77 times, 70 times before you are finally free of it and overcome whatever that unresolved generational dynamic is.
So Michael,
Yeah.
Yes.
question. Your paper is addressing exactly this. So let's say we have a goal that the fighting between Israelis and Palestinians ends and peace is achieved. This is a model of any war, anytime, anywhere, ever. So what is our goal? Our goal is to have war stop and have peace achieved somehow. We all have the goal. We all have that goal, but we're not at peace. How would you start applying the tools right there on that goal of ending war for all time and all places forever? Is that too big? No, it's probably
No.
not big.
That's right on. Go back and read James, and he says, you ask, you don't receive what you ask because you do not ask rightly.
Okay.
And so my offering would be, the answer to that question would be different for every person on the planet. It wouldn't just be, oh, we want there to be peace in the Middle East. No, that's not enough. I have to become the peace that I want to see in the Middle East. Mahatma Gandhi, become the change you want to see in the world. What's my disturbance? What's the energy of war that I generate from within me that supports that larger expression of war? So it might be, as I mentioned earlier, several different objects of attention I might have goals for. So it might be that I need to go in and cancel the goal for my uncle to confess what he did to me as a child and clean up that assault that he did. That might be what I ultimately have to deal with. That might be what my process might lead to. And now I become a space that, instead of holding unconscious trauma that's perhaps been going on for 100 generations in my bloodline, that's called the desert. When they spoke about most people spend 40 years in the desert, that wasn't about a 35 square mile hot sandy place in the Middle East. That was that word desert is the unconscious. What did they say had to happen to get out of the desert, to get out of the unconscious? They said the old generation has to die off. That doesn't mean everybody in old physical bodies has to physically die. The root of the word generation is genera. It means cause. All of the causes energetically held in us that energetically contribute to the insanity in the world, we individually and collectively need to be healing. So the work you might do around that is going to be different from the work I will do, will be different from Virginia's work, different from Carrie's, different from Rachmana's, different from Tim's, each one of us. maybe is going to have to do a different piece of work. And then we may reach the point where that also becomes one of the goals that we cancel. But there's a whole lot more underneath it. This collective war mentality needs to be both individually and collectively healed, would be my offering.
That's fantastic.
And notice the solution Job had that restored what he had lost and gave the world a lesson that will end war. What did he do? Oh, I went into Rachma for my neighbors, and I was restored. What did Yeshua say is the first law if you're going to have a human life? Have Rachma for your neighbors. That's where the resolution is going to take place. And, individually and collectively, people are going to have to build, if that's ever going to happen, we're going to have to build the brain cells for that. And that, to me, is the objective. That's why I do everything that I do, is to make
John,
it
you wanted to say
collectively
something?
available. Pardon me, Tim?
I think John wanted to add something.
Oh, please.
Yeah, getting back to Sue's question with the Middle East, how practically, because the Middle East is really two societies that the leadership rejects the religious principles of the other society.
It's actually an old family
So-
squabble. They're brothers.
Yeah.
Right, so the Quran and the Old Testament are at war. So
Isaac and Ishmael.
yeah, so I mean, when I
So,
listen to them
same
and watch
resolution.
them, they seem to be crystallized.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to. I
So
think
what Michael said was exactly that, though. Go there, find out the nugget in you that's rubbing, making an oyster in your clamshell. That gets addressed, whatever it is. It doesn't matter what it is, but as soon as that ball is rolling and you've achieved that affects the whole world. And then you can get to the point, if I'm understanding Michael, you can get to the point where you can actually address the big issue, but that's not really necessary. The necessary part is to do our own work inside ourselves and become an active, present space of love that affects the whole world.
It's all an inside job.
It's all on the
Yeah.
inside job. You got it.
And I think, both the Israelis and the Palestinians are acting out generations and generations and generations of trauma onto each other. They're
Yeah.
projecting that trauma onto each other.
Yeah, that's it exactly.
Ah,
I'm beginning to believe that in spiritual interventionism, that like a higher intelligence or spiritual intelligence has to say, okay, that's enough, guys.
He did it 2,000 years ago. He gave it to us, and the world disappeared as quickly as they could.
But we need another round.
That's what we're working on.
We need
Right.
another round. And I've imagined a spiritual being, shows up in the Middle East and takes the Kalashnikov away from somebody, says, you don't need this anymore. And then they try to kill him, but they realize that they can't kill him. And then he goes to the Kremlin and he talks to Mr. Putin. And Mr. Putin tells his guards to shoot him, but the bullets go right through him and they don't kill him. And so they become afraid of this spiritual being who kind of walks through walls shows up at different places. He's omnipresent, he's omnipotent, and he wants peace. I think that's the kind of intervention I'm looking for.
My only disagreement with you on that, John, is we're back in the old mindset of, oh, well, he'll inspire fear in them. No, what we need to do is inspire healing in them. They're already in fear. Their disease, their pathology. Everyone who's got a gun in their hand, their pathology is fear. As you said a few minutes ago when you talked about your near-life experience, you got rid of that pathology. We need that presence so that that pathology of fear disappears, because all war is based in that pathology. There's a powerful
Right, but
piece that was written. Excuse me, go ahead.
They may come to the conclusion that if this guy is eternal and he's so loving and caring, maybe I can become eternal, caring and loving. I think there are multi-dimensions to this issue, but it's really intractable. I mean, it's really insanity. I mean, it's beyond
Yeah,
pathology.
it's a pathology. There's no question. Hostility and fear in the human mind are pathology. That's all. There's a powerful piece that was written during the collapse of the Soviet Union by someone in Siberia, and it's called The Presence of the Light. Let me share it. We are not saints. We are not heroes. Our lives are lived in quiet corners of the ordinary. We build our tiny hearth fires, sometimes barely strong enough to give off warmth. But to the person lost in the darkness, our tiny flame may be the road to safety, the path to salvation. It is not given to us to know who's lost in the darkness that surrounds us, or even if our light is seen. We can only know that against even the smallest of lights, the darkness cannot stand. A sailor lost at sea can be guided home by a single candle. A person lost in the wood can be led to safety by a flickering flame. It is not an issue of quality or intensity or purity. It is simply an issue of the presence of the light. The solution to war is going to come when we become the presence of the light. And whatever each individual has to do to change that, that's the only thing that's going to change it.
Mhm. That's us.
That's us. The solution is here. We've been looking.
Well, I've been doing that for years.
Well,
I'm with you, John.
everyone looks outside though. You got to look inside.
Find the light, bring the light. That's
You know,
I
there's
think,
some people say, you know, there's a critical mass where you get enough people who are like that, that there's like a tipping point.
little leavening.
Yeah, and it's all, to me, it's all about the oneness, because we are all a part of the one. So that tipping point makes so much sense to me in that context. You know, it's like, you know, you have a glass of water and you dilute until you have a tipping point where you no longer see a color in that glass of water, if it was tea or whatever. I don't know, because that oneness becomes part of each and every individual. And I remember, I think it was you, Michael, that told a story many years ago. Correct me if I'm wrong, if it wasn't you, about a woman who was being raped at knife point or gunpoint or something. And she relaxed into the oneness and said to her potential rapist, who was holding her down and attempting to terrorize her, "I love you," with that fullness of the oneness.
Mm.
The man
And
began to
he
cry.
immediately broke down in tears and released her.
Yeah.
What everyone is looking for.
Yeah. That's what
Mhm.
we're looking for.
In 1998, I published my book and I closed it out with a poem written by an unknown author. And the poem, again, it just points back to where do we need to go? And the poem is entitled Each Moment. Each moment of love, each moment of giving, each moment of joy is a moment of living. Each moment of anger, each moment of lying, each moment of resentment is a moment of dying. All our moments add together like the digits in a sum, and the answer tells us plainly whether our life or our death shall come. What do you do with each moment? There's a work to be done. And again, if we're going to end this scourge called war, each of us is going to have to do the work that energetically contributes to this mass insanity called war. And each person's work is going to be different. I had the gift back. I used to keynote at a conference called Global Sciences, and I had the gift one year that Marcel Vogel, who was a 23-year senior scientist from IBM, was also keynoting at that conference. And the upshot of Marcel's presentation was that he brought a camera that was designed that had a tuning mechanism on the front of it. You didn't just flip the aperture open and the light was registered on the photographic plate, but it had to pass through a tuning mechanism. It's called a Delaware camera. And that Delaware camera would take a picture of whatever it was tuned to when you opened the aperture. So if, like, one of the pictures I've seen from it was of an acorn, and tuned properly, take the picture, and what shows up on the photographic plate is the oak tree. And you say, how could that be? Well, obviously, nobody's ever planted an acorn and gotten a Volkswagen or a rose or a butterfly or corn. Every time you plant an acorn, you get an oak tree. Why? Because the pattern of the oak tree is in there. So the upshot of Marcel's program or presentation was he brought pictures of the high energy waves that leave the mind when we think a thought. Literally every energy that we engage in this carbon-based memory system sets up a field. If the field is one of hostility and fear and rage and blame and guilt and unresolved pain and trauma, then the collective result of that is this scourge of war. Each individual that makes a change switches their vote, and exactly what you're saying, Carrie, becomes part of the critical mass, the leavening that Yeshua spoke about that leavens the whole loaf. He wasn't talking about bread, he was talking about humanity. That when we shift from this base energy of hostility and fear to one where Rahma is open, love is present in our physiology, then energetically we can become a vote for creating a light bright enough that those who are stuck in the darkness of unresolved past look and go, that's possible, and start to work toward the possible.
Michael,
That'd be my offering.
tell us about the butterfly effect.
The wings in Japan, great storms in America. Yeah. Energy, that's the whole objective. Every thought we think is a vote for either peace or war. And what most people call thinking is just cycling data. Who was it? David Bohm, physicist, said most people, when they say they're thinking, are simply rearranging their prejudices. They're just shuffling dirt around in carbon-based memory. Thinking happens when we awaken to being, as John's been talking about, and we bring presence, we bring conscious, active, present love into this physiology and into this world. That's thinking. The cheap copy is cycling information in carbon-based memory. That's not thinking. That's just cycling information. Or as Bohm referred to it, rearranging our prejudices.
Thank you so much, Michael, for attending our meeting, and really enjoyed it. I'm going to have to get going now, but I just wanted to say thank you.
Really, it's
Honored, delighted.
Thank you, Alan.
We'll have to do this again, more.
Anytime, I'm here. We
Thank
do it
you,
every day,
Michael.
5 days a week for an hour from 1 till 2 o'clock Eastern time on Mindshifters Radio. This is what we do. So come and join the conversation. It's now on Zoom. You just hit a Zoom link or you call into the number and you listen to the show, comment and participate 5 days a week.
Where
We've
do we
got well
find a
over
Zoom
five.
link?
We've been doing this for 15 and into our 16th year. There are well over 5,000 hours of this conversation in our archives. They're available on our YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and put in Michael Ryce, R-Y-C-E, and you've got access to thousands of videos.
Where do
This
we
is-
find the Zoom link, Michael?
I'll send it to you.
Okay, thank you.
And good to
Okay.
see you again, Rakamana. It's been a long time.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming, everybody. Thank you, Michael, so much.
Absolutely honored and delighted. Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Sue, for coalescing us like little chickens.
Yeah.